Well, I think management of the skills of how you do things, leadership is really the ability to empower people, to align people around a common mission and values, to set standards of what you want to be and what you want an organization to become, and then to empower other people to step up and lead. It's not about leaders and followers like we used to think. And leaders are not people who get people to follow them. They're people who inspire others to lead. And leadership is service. It's about serving whether you're your customers or your students, if you want in an academic sense, certainly the employees who work with you and people, your owners. But I think it's really more about service. And we've had too many leaders that saw themselves more as takers than givers. And I think we need leaders who are givers, and that's the influence I'm trying to have. For my new book, True North, interviewed 125 leaders who are authentic leaders. And I think you can't be a good leader unless you can be the authentic person you were meant to be. And too much of our leadership development in the 70s and 80s and even 90s was focused on trying to make you into a standard leader, to emulate other great leaders, or to be a charismatic leader, or to fit a certain set of traits and characteristics. And what we learned, and what I've learned, is leadership is not about any of those things. It's about being who you are and having integrity in everything you do, and empowering other people around a common belief set. And if you can do that, you can lead. And I think it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are, you can become that leader. And that's the message I've been trying to communicate to people. Well, I don't think you really do teach leadership. I think you can learn leadership. In my classrooms at Harvard Business School, for instance, we believe not knowledge transfer, as in from the professor to the students, but more knowledge exchange, where people are sharing their leadership experiences, studying what other leaders did, saying, what would I do if I were in that situation, and exchanging ideas about leadership, and particularly where they had failed, or where they faced crises, or where they faced difficult times, which we call crucibles. That's where the real learning comes from. And it's the magic of the classroom, the dialogue, that I find so precious and such a great learning opportunity. Well, I think it should be, but it certainly hasn't been. I think all too often business leaders have been in there to take as much as they could get for themselves or for their organization, rather than recognizing the greater good, and that the only reason for business existing in our society is if it makes a contribution to the societal good. We have no other basis for existing. And I was on the board of a French company once when the socialist government of François Mitterrand came in, and immediately nationalized the company, which was Bull, the computer company, on which I was serving on the board. And because in the French sense, companies had no right to exist. And we saw here in the United States, Sarbanes-Oxley came in to limit the powers of business leaders because they took advantage of the system. And so I think business has a deep responsibility to realize, how is it contributing to society? At Medtronic, we were very cognizant of the fact that we were restoring 7 or 8 million people every year to full life and health. And if we produced a low-quality product, we had failed in what we were doing. But if we did that well, we made a great contribution to human life. And I think each organization, in its own way, maybe not saving lives, but contributes to society if they do it well. And if they don't, they'll go out of business. They won't exist anymore. You know, honestly, I'm very optimistic about the current generation, what I call the post-Enron CEOs. People like Jeff Immelt at General Electric, and Andrea Jung at Avon Products, Ann Mulcahy at Xerox. We have some great leaders coming up. Sam Palmisano at IBM, A.G. Lafley at Procter & Gamble, and many, many leaders of smaller companies, like the leaders at Google and a lot of the startup companies, and Howard Schultz at Starbucks. There's just a great new generation of leaders. You know why? Because they realized how so many in my generation did it wrong. And you could almost characterize my generation as the unilateralist leaders. So we're going to do it our way. And the new generation realized we have to be collaborative leaders. We have to collaborate within, and we also have to collaborate with other institutions, either other businesses, governments, or nonprofit organizations. So instead of fighting against those organizations, the wise organizations are now finding ways to bond with them to accomplish greater societal needs. You know, having studied leaders most of my life and having formally done it through this research, I think it's really not a question of whether leaders are made or born. I think because we're all born with the gifts of leadership, but each of us is unique. There's no standard set. But we have to develop those gifts. Just if like you're a great musician and you want to be a great musician, you want to go to Carnegie Hall, you'd practice your using your gifts every day. Same with great athletes. I think it's no different with leaders. Leaders have to develop themselves as leaders. In our study of leaders, every single leader who has failed that I've studied failed to lead themselves. And so if we can help people develop themselves, leadership from within rather than just leadership from without, they can become great leaders, but to using the gifts they have. If they try to emulate someone else's gifts, they will fail without question. You know, for too long we've been studying what are the characteristics and traits of great leaderships, and I could reel off a list of 10 or 25 traits and characteristics, but every great leader that I could name would miss some of those traits. And there may be people who have all those traits are not great leadership. So in what I learned from the 125 leaders I interviewed and from my own personal experience of working with literally hundreds of leaders, it's not about traits or characteristics. It's about your life story, and it's about fidelity to your life story, who you are. You have certain tapes running through your head about saying, who am I in this world? Where are my passions? What do I want to do? And out of that comes your capacity for leadership. And we've just seen time after time leaders be inspired by their own stories, by their own difficult, by their own crucibles. Oprah Winfrey talks about the abuse she encountered as a young girl, but it wasn't until she was 36 that she was able to frame and see this as that gave her inspiration to say, you know, what my show is all about is empowering people to take responsibility for their lives. Howard Schultz talks about wanting to create a company in Starbucks that his father never had a chance to work at, that his father would be proud to work at. And that's why he gave health care to all his workers, because he wanted to be a great place to work. And through that, create a relationship between the customers and the employees. And so through their life stories, we found almost every leader found their inspiration to lead, and that's what empowered them to become great leaders.